Well, it kind of feels like the Cardinals are fading. Is there time still for John Mozeliak to embark upon a rescue mission for this roster? What's going on, everyone, and welcome into this edition of B-Schaeff Daily. Brenden Schaeffer here with you in the now early morning hours of Sunday, July 28th, 2024, because that dadgum rain delay on Saturday night pushed our podcasting time back pretty far here as we are past midnight, but that's okay. What's not okay for a lot of Cardinals fans was the outcome of the game. 14-3, the Washington Nationals beat the Cardinals for the second consecutive day. And wow, doesn't it feel like the Cardinals are fading fast? They have dropped 3 straight games now in 9 of their last 14, dating back to the doubleheader against the Royals a couple of weeks ago. The Cardinals are now a couple of games out of a wild card spot. The National League standings have been tightening up around them in recent days and weeks, and now the Cardinals find themselves on the wrong end of the ledger, and it's not necessarily by a minuscule amount. Like the margin is growing as they've dropped 3 in a row. The Diamondbacks have now won 4 straight. They've surpassed the Cardinals. So the Cardinals aren't even the team knocking on the door of the wild card spot at this point. Braves, Padres, and Mets are currently your wild card holders as we sit here pushing on 1 a.m. on Sunday morning. Padres have won 7 in a row. Mike Schildt's team, how about that? I mean, they're doing some great work out there out west. The D-backs, they've won 4 in a row and 7 of their last 10 to get to 55-50, just a half game behind the Mets. And the Mets losing Kodai Senga to a severe calf strain for the remainder of the season is going to haunt them, I reckon. Now, there's still time for the Mets to address it. It's better that it happens to the Mets a couple days before the deadline than a few days after, because now they're at least able to say, hey, we have to reckon with the idea that we might need another starter and still go out and find a way to address that while there's legally time to do so by trading for one from another team. The Cardinals, though, they're 2 games behind the Mets, game and a half behind the Diamondbacks, and they're looking over their shoulders still at teams like the Pirates, who, despite losing a couple in a row, are still just a game behind St. Louis. They're even 500 right now, 52-52. The Giants have won 3 in a row of their own, so you can't entirely count them out of it. Blake Snell, an absolute gem. I think he struck out 15 for them on Saturday. If it's his last game as a Giant and they do decide to sell, I'm sure he upped his trade value with that one. But even the teams that you're not really thinking about are realistically not that far behind St. Louis right now. And that run differential that the Cardinals have not been necessarily too proud of this season, well, it got worse, obviously, on Saturday night. They're a minus 49 now. For those keeping track of that, just the Rockies and the Marlins worse in the National League. The Washington Nationals now are a minus 34 because they were on the other side of that swing. So the Cardinals fall behind the Nationals in that category based on an 11-run loss tonight, 14-3. What do you do, Cardinals fans? Like that's what we're going to stew on for the next half hour or so as I just kind of try to stream of consciousness my way through thinking through what this team is at this point. Because it seemed very clear within, I don't know, it wasn't all that long ago, within the last couple of weeks, and for the majority of the month of July and even probably late June, like the Cardinals were surging. They had that nice record post Mother's Day, and I think everybody sort of assumed, yeah, they're going to be in buy mode. The Cardinals are going to add at the deadline, and I still feel like that's the mode they're in. But it's not a foregone conclusion to me that John Mozeliak and his front office are going to accomplish it over the next couple of days. I mean, we're getting down to the nitty-gritty now with the trade deadline coming at 5 p.m. Central Time on Tuesday. I put out a Twitter poll tonight right around the start of game time. I think if I had to go back and look if it was 8 o'clock or when I put it out. But I asked Cardinals fans, do you think the Cardinals are going to make a deal tonight before midnight? And 1,200 of you voted. 89% of you said nope, and 89% of you were correct. The 11%, you can come back tomorrow because I'm going to put the poll back out. If I wake up on Sunday and the Cardinals haven't dealt for somebody overnight, I'll put it back out for people. Because I do think, I mean, my gosh, you're running out of days to do it if you're going to do it. I do think it's about time for the Cardinals to get on the board. This has been a somewhat, it's been a somewhat active deadline so far, and we're not even to the end of it yet. Tuesday's going to happen. That'll be an active afternoon, you figure, morning and afternoon. Monday's a full day, and Sunday, we've still got that to go. Teams are filling needs, and at the same time as we're seeing those teams fill needs, we are seeing other teams basically kind of express through various reports their reluctance to trade certain high-profile pieces. Looking at Twitter right now, the storyline is that the Athletics are reluctant to trade Brent Rooker. This is from John Heyman. A's are telling teams are reluctant to trade Brent Rooker, 948 OPS, or J.J. Bleday, who's got 30 doubles. I wouldn't have guessed that. With progress being made and 103.7 mile per hour closer Mason Miller on the shelf, it doesn't look like a huge sale for them. Like, as much as we can make the jokes about the A's, what was it? Within the last week or so, I was doing a podcast about trade deadline stuff, and I said, well, the A's are going to lose 100 games. And then I said, I should probably actually look at their record and see if that's true. And it's not true. Like, they're tracking to do better than that. I'm checking out J.J. Bleday's numbers. That's called a baseball trade right there, because Bleday was dealt for A.J. Puck. The Marlins had A.J. Puck, and they got him from originally the Athletics. I think back in spring training, sent Bleday to Oakland. Bleday's got a 743 OPS. Good for him, because he was another guy that was highly touted prospect. We were kind of thinking maybe was not going to ever pan out, but now he's doing very well. Doing very well with Oakland. I might be also transposing the years of this. That AJ Puck trade might have happened in 2023. Now I have to check that out. But anyway, these deals are being made by teams, and then the deals that you might have thought, hey, this could be on the table. This could be something the Cardinals could do. Yeah, that was spring training 2023. My goodness, time flies. I lost a whole year thinking about the Puck-Bleday trade. There are guys that the Cardinals, or their fan base anyway, thinks, hey, this guy could be pretty good. That guy might not be traded. Garrett Crochet, not being traded. I don't think he's going to get traded. The demands that him, or whether you couch it to him or his agency, made about needing an extension to pitch in October, although I did see a pretty good joke on Twitter that Cardinals don't have to worry about that because they might not be in October. Might not need him to pitch then. Thought that was kind of funny. Against the spirit of what we're doing here, though, I will say Cardinals are trying to buy. I think the Cardinals should be trying to buy. I just don't know how feasible it's going to be. We saw some more deals made throughout Major League Baseball on Saturday. Jazz Chisholm going to the Yankees stands out. The Phillies landed Carlos Estevez from the Angels to lock down their bullpen. They had traded Sir Anthony Dominguez in a deal with the Orioles. So they're kind of moving and shaking and reorienting their roster as they see fit. That's what I think people wanted to see for the Cardinals, and radio silence so far. And it's frustrating, too, when you can think about this Cardinals roster. And they lost 14-3 tonight. I'm not going to get too in-depth on the game, although I will stop for a moment and say, hey, subscribe to this channel. If you enjoy Cardinals content and you haven't done so yet, we're putting out new stuff every day, all year long, and it's all St. Louis Cardinals pretty much. We'll do some other baseball stuff, too, but heavy on the Cardinals content here on the Brenden Schaeffer St. Louis Cardinals Writer YouTube channel. And you can follow the B-Schaeff Daily podcast on Spotify. Really close to hitting another follower milestone over there on Spotify. So appreciate you guys for checking us out on the podcast apps. And then check out the video description here below where you can join the Discord or the YouTube membership to support us in those ways. So all that being said, not talking about the game as much, but the 14-3 loss was sort of a demonstration of some of the issues of the roster. I mean, guys like Matthew Liberatore have not been sharp recently. Is he somebody that needs to go down to work on something in the minors? Giovanni Gallegos pitched. He struck out 4 in the inning in, I think, 2/3 that he pitched, but they just clearly don't trust him in any other games but these mop-up situations. And that, what's the utility of that on a roster? There's some skepticism of how long Gio is going to be around on this roster from some, just because if you're going to try to really make a genuine playoff push, it seems as though the faith in what Gallegos can bring you in a leverage role has been lost by the organization. And I'm only saying that based on usage recently, right? And I'm not even saying it's the wrong decision. We saw what it looked like earlier on in the season for him when they did trust him with those roles, and it got him put on the IL. Then he comes back, and they have been very hesitant to put him in to roles other than mop-up duty. And again, I get it, because you lost games because of the struggles of Gallegos. He has been important to the team for so long. That's what makes it difficult to maybe make a business decision on him here coming up. But I think if you're talking about the margins of the roster, and if that's all you can do is John Mozeliak to try and improve at this deadline because the big deals aren't being made by very many teams, and the teams that are making them have maybe more prospect firepower than you do, or more of a willingness to trade some of those prospects. I mean, it's getting to the point where the Cardinals are never beating the allegations, right, of hoarding prospects a little bit too tightly. You've got guys right now that aren't really top prospects, but they used to be, and they're underperforming big leaguers, guys like Nolan Gorman. I'll put Jordan Walker into that category, even though he underperformed to the extent that now he's not in the big leagues at this point. He's in the minors. These are things that the Cardinals are, I would have to think, sort of grappling with right now as they say, we don't want to trade away these guys because if we do, we're selling them lower than the value that we believe they have, right? If we were talking about these names 6 months ago, it's a completely different conversation. And can you stomach the stark decline in what teams might be willing to give for those players when you really never had any intention of trading them in the first place? You viewed them as foundational building blocks. But when those guys aren't performing consistently, and your veterans, guys like Goldie and Arenado, have not performed to expectation this year, but you went out and spent on a new rotation to try and patch up this roster and get it back to playoff shape so you could tell your fan base to continue supporting the product and that 2023 was just an anomaly. You don't have to freak out. Like, it feels like there should be a lot riding on this trade deadline, and yet we're still kind of getting silence from the Cardinals. I'm going to continue to reiterate that if they make a trade today, if they make these big moves that people are wondering if they'll end up doing, then I'm going to come on here with the next podcast and say, hey, John Mozeliak, you did it. So I always hate to criticize something that we don't know the outcome to yet. Sometimes patience and making your moves right before the end of the deadline can be a very profitable way of doing business. So I'm not criticizing John Mozeliak yet, but I'm ready to question if teams around him and teams around the Cardinals in the National League continue to make moves and the Cardinals don't, where was the urgency from the front office? I'm not sitting here questioning the urgency of the players and questioning the urgency of coaching staff and Ollie Marmol. Like, they're trying to win. They've all got individual jobs trying to win these games. And right now the Cardinals are in a skid. They're coming up short, and it's a rough time for that to be happening because now would be the time that ideally you'd like to be getting on a little bit of a roll so that when you're adding at the deadline, it doesn't feel like you're trying to patch up the Titanic. It feels more like we're already heading in a good direction, and this is going to make things even better. That's what the feeling ideally would be, but it's not. I mean, that's just not where the Cardinals are at this moment, but it's also just a snapshot of the season. There have been times, and Ollie Marmol said this tonight in his postgame, where, look, it's not looked good for this 3-game stretch or whatever it's been, but you could find a 100-game stretch before that where it bears out that the Cardinals were a winning ball club. Now, I think it had been really kind of a roller coaster because you started off really slow and then you were really hot. Those 100 games, though, that's a pretty good sample size to say, hey, the Cardinals had been a pretty good team, and right now they're starting to slip a bit. It's just a rough time to slip because I think it's calling into question for some people, is this team even worth buying for? Should Mozeliak even bother buying with what's going on right now, or is this a lost cause? And it's not my opinion, but I know that there are people out there thinking it because I've seen it. The sentiment that this Cardinals team isn't going anywhere, regardless of the degree to which they make some moderate to incremental acquisitions and upgrades over the next 3 days, is out there alive and well. And while I can't say definitively that it's wrong, I have such a hard time. And Cardinals fans, you're the only folks in the world that can, I'm not even going to say correct me on this, but can give me the insight. Y'all have the insight, and I want to hear where you're coming from with this. Explain the mindset for me, where you say, I just don't want to see them add at the deadline because I don't believe that good things can happen over the next 2 months. Because there have been stretches of this season where good things have happened. Let's not get caught up in just the micro recency of it. There have been somewhat lengthy stretches where good things have happened for this Cardinals team. But it's not happening right now in this moment, so I feel like people are kind of getting a little bit panicky of, oh boy, I don't want to see the Cardinals make that next trade that we'll be talking about down the line where they gave up so-and-so for a middle reliever and they live to regret it. People don't necessarily have enough faith in this roster the way it's performing over the past, I would say 2 weeks is fair. It's not just 3 games. Like at the same time as I'm going to say, should we pump the brakes on the full-scale panic for a team that is still above 500 and right in the mix along with a number of other teams, I think I also then would need to acknowledge that we shouldn't minimize a stretch that if they're 5-9 over the last couple of weeks, which is really more like 2.5 weeks because the All-Star break was mixed in there. You've played 14 games. So, a little more than half a month that we've seen the Cardinals downturn. And while there have been fits and starts of a couple of games mixed in there where the offense has looked really good, those games have occasionally been marked by, we can take Friday night, for example, a game where they scored a bunch of runs, but the pitching wasn't strong, starting pitching wasn't strong, and then the bullpen was, I use the word sloppy, and I don't think it's unfair because they walked a bunch of guys and they had a significant issue holding on runners that I don't pin on the catcher Pedro Pajes. For me, it was more about the pitchers, and I think that was the sentiment that Ollie shared on Friday night. By the way, a sentiment that he did not share on Friday night, but was something that I spent some time talking about. I am going to tangent here for a moment, but this is something that I alluded to yesterday kind of openly for a number of minutes in the podcast, talking about that intentional walk in the 10th inning on Friday. And I mentioned that it wasn't asked on Friday night, and I kind of explained a little bit of why, because sometimes you ask that question in the heat of the moment, and you may not get as much of an insightful answer. The post-game podium is not the best spot always for an answer that could last a while, where there's a lot of nuance to it, and you'd like to be able to explore all the elements. And I said, I'll be interested to see Saturday pregame if that's a question that gets asked. Well, it did get asked. It got asked by me. It ended up being a pretty interesting back and forth between myself and Ollie, where, look, I think his opinion was pretty clear that it wasn't a debatable close call as to whether or not they should walk intentionally Luis Garcia in that 10th inning on Friday night to face Trey Lipscomb. And I think it was for a lot of the reasons that I even alluded to last night, where I said, look, their belief is Ryan Fernandez v. Trey Lipscomb is their best chance to keep the Nationals off the board in that inning. And if you do that, you can go to the bottom of the inning with a chance to win the game. But I was curious philosophy-wise, if Ollie Marmol, how much do you bake in the notion that it may not be the death knell to give up a run, but giving up multiple runs probably does end the game. And like I said, it was a lengthy back and forth where I asked him a question and he sort of asked me some as well. And I did. I told him I think I might have let it play out with Luis Garcia, which, hearing the explanations and still the explanations I gave last night, it's not like I was 100% on that side of things, but I did think there was some merit to it. And I know it was a move that others were sort of questioning and at least wondering about in the moment. So I was honestly thought it was just maybe a moment for some interesting baseball conversation this morning pregame. And, I definitely learned how the Cardinals view it. If I didn't know it already, they're always going to play the aggressive way to try and win the game right then and there. And I think a big part of it, too, which I didn't allude to last night, I did talk about how Ollie had used his bullpen up already. I think Gio was really the only guy that would have been available. Roycroft had thrown 3 innings the day before. Libby, Ollie mentioned this morning, was not available for a potential 11th inning. So if you're the Cardinals, you've basically emptied the clip. And you're not looking to go to an 11th inning because it probably ends up having to be Gio that throws it. You've used Kittredge, JoJo, Helsley in the 9th. Now it's Fernandez in the 10th. The matchup against Garcia, who has a 780 OPS against righties, not as desirable. But when it was coming to the stolen base, like that was all things that Ollie said was already baked in. Like they knew the base would be stolen, that it would be second and third. Because with the guy on third, you can't throw through. They don't care about that second runner. It is making a bet on the at-bat against Lipscomb. And when he walks him, you're still facing the bottom of the order, the 9-hole batter. So worst case scenario, you still got a decent shot when he walks Trey Lipscomb. Obviously, what happened, and it's still a ball that Carlson's got to catch. And frankly, a moment where Ryan Fernandez just has to throw a strike to Trey Lipscomb because that's his man. But we really litigated all that last night. We don't have to get back into it. More than anything else, I thought it would be valuable to hear his philosophy and his process on that, specific to how the ghost man interacts and how the runner on second interacts. And his thought was basically, that guy's not automatic. We can't view that in the bottom of the 10th for us, for the Cardinals, as automatic. because there have been times where we haven't scored that run, right? And I think the percent was a little bit above 50% that they would say that run's going to score. But at best case scenario, then you score that run and you have to play an 11th inning where you've emptied the clip in your bullpen, and they didn't use Kyle Finnegan to that point. And so they would have had their closer available, which was another aspect that Ollie mentioned today, which, yeah, again, I came into it thinking, I don't know, I probably would have let it go with Luis Garcia. And I'm okay with saying, you know what, I probably was the wrong decision. And then you look this evening, Luis Garcia with an RBI hit against a righty early in the game. I'm okay with being wrong about stuff. I really am. I thought it would be an interesting process question for Ollie. And if nothing else, I'm able to come back and say, look, that as much as we out in the public maybe thought, interesting decision, you're going to walk him. What's it? It wasn't for the Cardinals. I think it's that killer instinct of we're going to win it now. We're going to take our best shot to not have any runs given up, because once you give up a run, then you're scrambling, you're chasing your tail. And even if you are able to match the run they score in the top of the 10th, which was a lot of the premise that I had last night when I said that would be the argument. Even if I'm, devil's advocating, that would be the argument is, well, at least you can extend the game. Well, reality is, and this is something that I regret not mentioning more last night, but after the question to Ollie this afternoon, I'm able to kind of see that a little bit more, is just how important the notion of, as I said, with Gio being your last line of defense for the Cardinals, we know that's not ideal. But the part I should have mentioned more was Kyle Finnegan still being available for the Nats last night would have given them the advantage in any future inning. So that's the explanation from yesterday. So forgive the lengthy tangent. Nobody has ever accused me of having a good order of operations to these podcasts. I certainly don't think that's ever been said. But the point I was driving home previously to remembering that I wanted to mix in some conversation about that intentional walk because it was addressed this afternoon was that this recent stretch of the last 14 games, Cardinals offense has largely been bad, and even when they've been good, there have been some of those games that you've found ways to lose as well because of general sloppiness. So if that's the team that it feels like the Cardinals are right now, is that a team worth adding to? I want to hear that from fans in the comments section, because I could understand your sentiment at this point. I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to agree with it and say, yeah, the Cardinals should just pack it in. And then there have been some who, and look, I'm crediting the people thinking this way because you're shrewd. You have a shrewd sense of what the business of baseball looks like when you say not only should the Cardinals not buy, but they should consider trading Ryan Helsley right now, because you're looking across the game and seeing the price of premium relief pitching and what teams are willing to pay to get it. And there's no question that Ryan Helsley would instantly be the top available arm on the market, in my opinion, starter or reliever. I mean, I think he would just be the top asset on the trade market if he were to be made available. And there have been top prospects and players that are just crushing it at their various levels of the minors that are being exchanged for guys like Carlos Estevez. I mean, we're seeing relief pitchers have pretty good value. Now, I don't think it's unfair value. It always takes talent to get talent, but if you're the Cardinals and you don't really think this is your year internally, based on the way things are going right now, then it wouldn't be the craziest thing in the world, because we do know relief pitching tends to be fickle, and it's one of those things that Ryan Helsley is great right now, but do you know? And again, I hate to even pin it to specifically Ryan Helsley, because I think he's going to continue to be great. He's a great arm. But over the course of time, how often do we see relievers tend to just kind of lose it at a certain point for inexplicable reasons? Like Giovanni Gallegos would be an example of this. He's been dominant for the Cardinals for several years, and then last year there's a downturn, and this year it expanded, and we haven't seen him be the same guy. Ryan Helsley has a ton of value right now. Like, I don't share this sentiment, but I understand Cardinals fans that are looking at it from a shrewd standpoint, saying, hey, man, this is the time to get you don't think a team like the Orioles or one of those teams with a bunch of legit prospects would say, yeah, we'll give you a top, legit at least one, maybe more than one top 100 MLB prospect for Ryan Helsley. Now, granted, Cardinals don't have a closer at that point. Like, you're not finding a way to sneak in the playoffs without Ryan Helsley. I don't think there's any way. So you would be having a hard time explaining to guys like Sonny Gray and Nolan Arenado and Wilson Contreras what's up if you're trading Ryan Helsley. But some of those guys, Wilson's had a very good year, but Sonny and Arenado are not really performing up to the standard that we thought they would be setting. And so in part, that's where you lose some games from their, from whatever their ceiling would be that you expected to be up here on this pedestal, and they're performing a few notches below that. Cardinals probably have more wins if those guys were meeting those expectations. So it's, as much as I get the idea of need to placate the stars and make sure that they are bought in and player morale is good, you also have to kind of say, is part of the reason the team's not better is individually and collectively some of those guys not hitting their marks. All of that, though, is probably a very moot point, because while I understand people out there in the fan base want the Cardinals to be shrewd and behave in a way that we have not historically seen with bold decisions, like a bold decision would be buying heavily, right? Trading guys like Walker or swapping out Gorman because you're making a bet that he's not going to hit on being the stud that you thought he would be consistently as he was coming up as a prospect, or would be to trade a top pitching prospect. Talk down on the farm a little bit, but Tim Kentz came back tonight from his recent injured spell, and he looked really good. Boldness would be we're cashing some of these guys in to pick up a big ticket item or two, and we're going to go for it. Cardinals don't typically operate that way. The blockbuster deals they've made for guys like Goldie and Arenado in recent years, it's not been their top prospects that they're selling for those moves. It's been waiting out teams like the Diamondbacks because they thought they were going to lose Goldie without getting anything. And so they're taking Luke Weaver and they're taking Carson Kelly. Young players, but not players that we deemed as superstars at the time, and not really top echelon prospects then either. The Arenado deal, certainly no top prospects were given. Austin Gomber was a name that was performing at the big league level. He had pitched there, but didn't have great numbers, but was a young arm they could slot in, and it's actually worked out okay for them. He's pitching decent for them this season, but basically everybody else in that deal, Alauros Montero hasn't really panned out a ton, and I don't think they've heard hide nor hair of the other guys that were involved in that deal. So the Cardinals, when they're making the big swings, it's been because John Mozeliak has waited for the perfect time to do it, and those have been savvy moves. This is obviously a different situation. You'd be under duress and at risk of maybe getting a team trying to swoop in to take advantage of the perception of the value right now of a Gorman or a Walker. And I just never seen John Mozeliak be the type of executive that's going to balk under that pressure. He's not going to do something rash just because it could pass as boldness. And I think there's a lot of Cardinals fans who would stand by that, especially when you think about the types of players that you would be. All right, if you're really going to trade one of those names, even if it's pie in the sky, you're looking at the Crochets or the Brent Rookers, and we're hearing, day by day, reasons that those guys aren't going to be traded anyway. So that version of boldness, I don't think the Cardinals are going to have at their disposal this deadline. I just don't see it coming. Maybe an Eric Fetty, that could be like the biggest name you could see, and I've seen rumblings that even the Brewers are maybe trying to go get him. So boldness doesn't feel like what the Cardinals are going to see at the deadline. The other version that would technically qualify as boldness, though, is like saying, yeah, we're sellers, surprise, and we just couldn't avoid how robust the offer was for Ryan Helsley, and we sold him. But then you have a lot of other interpersonal things in that clubhouse that are going to have to be managed because there are going to be questions. I always harken back to when the Brewers traded Josh Hader while they were either in first place when that happened or they were in a playoff spot a couple of years ago. And that clubhouse basically melted after that. Say what you will, but I'll never believe any other story than you trade a dominant guy like Hader. What does that say about what those guys in the front office with the calculators and the analytics are? What do those guys know? I mean, I am sure that was a problem for that clubhouse because those guys knew that Josh Hader was an important piece for their team. I remember even the guy who took his spot as closer, Devin Williams, who's also a wipeout relief pitcher. He even had comments at the time going, I don't understand this move. I wasn't looking to take Josh Hader's role. We were looking to have a bunch of dudes at the back of our bullpen to be great and go make a run at this thing. And they ended up fading down the stretch. I believe that was in 2022 when the Cardinals overtook them and won the Central. So for me, I understand that there are folks out there, if you like to play out of the park baseball and MLB The Show, and you see the value of some of these relievers right now, and you understand what I understand, that sometimes it's not even about Ryan Helsley specifically. Sometimes, man, relief pitchers, they just don't last. And we saw that in 21 as a great example. At that deadline of 21, Alex Reyes was probably in a similar spot where you could have gotten the world for him. Was an amazing reliever and later closer that year. And the Cardinals are like, well, we're trying to make the playoffs. We're not really looking to move Alex Reyes. Okay, you made the playoffs, and you lost in that wild card game. It doesn't matter that Reyes was the guy that gave up the home run either, but he was. But then we never heard from Alex Reyes again. I'm not predicting that for Ryan Helsley, of course. Reyes had a bunch of injury history prior to that, as we all know. But that's just an example of why the fans out there that say trade Helsley because you can get a bunch for him, it's not because they don't like Ryan Helsley. It's a value proposition. I understand that completely. I'm not that shrewd. I'm not shrewd enough to overlook what that impact would be on the clubhouse. And I still believe that the goal should be to make the playoffs. And I do find value in it. I know there are some Cardinals fans who don't because they say, yeah, you'll get in and what'll happen? You drop a couple of games to one of the better seeds, probably on the road, if you sneak in as a late wild card at this point. Maybe that is the way it goes. I just feel a conviction that that's what's owed to Cardinals fans. Like, I'm saying that on y'all's behalf. You could tell me you don't want it, and that's fine. I also think we would have to recognize that the segment of Cardinals fans that tends to spend time online and listen to podcasts like this one, y'all are locked in a lot more than just maybe the more casual Cardinals fan who wants to see their team in the playoff. They're not thinking about always as much of the business side of it. And if you're John Mozeliak and you're this front office, that is a group of folks that make up a pretty good size of your fan base, pretty good chunk. So to send a message of, yep, we're trading our closer, even the most casual of baseball fans, of sports fans, could look at that news tidbit and go, all right, that's not anything that gives me any enthusiasm or excitement about what this Cardinals team is about to do or thinks it could do. So I think the message it sends, while there are arguments to be made for the shrewdness of it and the business savvy of doing something like that, it's just the same as you could say, there could be some shrewdness to a Paul Goldschmidt trade where you open up first base for Alec Burleson, and then you can maybe go out and get yourself another outfielder or call Jordan Walker back and say, I know you haven't been performing at Memphis very much, but this is, we're going to try to jumpstart you by just putting you right in and saying we have belief in you. There are a number of things you could do. I just don't think that those are the routes the Cardinals are going to take. We know the way that historically the Cardinals operate, and I don't see a major shift from that coming up within the next 3 days, even though John Mozeliak is nearing the end of his tenure as Pobo. As we've alluded to a number of times, the contract is up after 2025. I just don't think that you're going to suddenly see him do an about face on the principles that he has carried through his entire tenure and legacy in St. Louis to kind of YOLO it at the end. Would be kind of wild if he did. I'd be here for it just because I think it would be chaotic and entertaining from a podcasting perspective and a baseball writer perspective. We'd certainly have a lot to cover and dive into. But I understand that there is maybe some value in kind of hold and serve to your principles. The problem's going to be is if your principles land you on the side of even those incremental moves and upgrades, well, those were too hard. We weren't able to get anything done. Like, that's going to piss people off, and rightfully so. Like I said earlier in this show, I'm not saying that's happened. I'm not saying grab your pitchforks just yet because you got to give the man his time. July 28th at 1 a.m. is not the deadline. It's July 30th at 5 p.m. Central. So I'm going to allow that leeway to kind of, before I really start hammering home the point that I think Mo has failed, well, let's let him fail first. Let's be fair about that. There's angst, though. There's angst among Cardinals fans because you're seeing teams do things and you'd like to see, regardless of which side of the aisle you're on the they need to buy and go win now versus they should be more prudent in terms of considering strategically selling off some pieces to potentially rearrange some things. Regardless, you just want to see action. And you are I'll use the phrase entitled to it. Like I think as a Cardinals fan, you should be, after what happened last year and the way this season had been framed by the organization in the front office. They acted like last year was an anomaly, so you shouldn't have to cling to the standards that the organization was drugged down to as a result of last year. Don't cling to a standard that's like, it's good enough to just kind of be in the mix since we weren't last year. No, you should demand being in the postseason in a front office that's going to get you there, that's going to find a way to improve the on-field product. And if it were one of those cases where there weren't obvious moves to be made to improve incrementally this roster, then I think it would be a little bit more difficult to criticize a world in which they do nothing. But a world in which they do nothing right now, I don't think should be accepted, because even though there are guys you might like and guys you might think, have been nice to have around, I don't think they are all on that 26-man roster serving the most utility. I'm going to continue to keep it professional. They're not all serving the most utility for winning ball games, but specifically like for Ollie Marmol. He's kind of working with a bench right now that's like, I was surprised Dylan Carlson was still on the bench on Saturday. He's got options. He doesn't have 5 years of service time. Figure it out. Just you send him out. I had advocated for Pedro Pajes to be the guy above Ivan Herrera as the backup catcher, and I'll still stand by that because I think what he does behind the plate is so strong. But Ivan Herrera as a right-handed bat, as a DH option, as just a pinch hitter off the bench from the right side, hitting lefties could actually be pretty viable right now. And I think serves more utility than what Dylan does as a guy that you're scared to death to put into right field or center field at this point, because you've seen the routes he's taken on the most recent fly balls that were hit his direction. And I think he's out there kind of guessing. It doesn't look good. So you can't put him in the field. Why is he on the team? Right? Like, and I say this as somebody, look, I'm having to wear it like a scarlet letter. Believe me, that I was very much a supporter of Dylan Carlson's last year and believing that the Cardinals should give him more opportunity. Now I'm not defending his play now. I'm watching what's happened. I made the tongue-in-cheek comments that I'd buy all the stock, but that's just because I think if he's traded somewhere else or he's given a chance in another organization, that could be the fresh start that he needs to see his stock prices go from literal penny stock levels, to use the econ terminology, to, back to being maybe a respectable big leaguer, even if he's just more of a fourth outfielder. I get it. Everybody connects him to the Juan Soto thing, and that's never going to go away. I'm not going to try to continue to relitigate that, because if by now it's not known, then it never will be known, the context of how that played out. But those sort of labels tend to stick with Cardinals fans. Why do you think I'm able to name a podcast with Charlie Marlowe low-hanging fruit? Or the one with Josh Jacobs, philosophical differences? It's because we cling to him. It's meme status almost at this point, and everybody knows what you're talking about without you having to explain any further. That's just the way it goes, and the Dylan Carlson, Juan Soto thing is going to be around forever. It's unavoidable. The Arozarena thing, oh yeah, Liberatore. It's the connection is never going to be broken. Which, by the way, I did tweet after Arozarena was traded to the Mariners that the Cardinals inarguably won the Liberatore Arozarena trade. Come on, people were coming at me tonight because of that comment after Liberatore pitched just really poorly, just didn't have it tonight. But it's like that was not a real tweet. That was in jest. Come on, guys. You know that. But getting back to my point about the roster and where I do think incremental upgrades could be made, I'm not really in the business of telling the Cardinals and just saying, here's all the guys that I think they should just get rid of. But if you look at the utility of certain players, what's the role for Carlson right now? What's the role for Gallegos right now? Roycroft has been pitching a lot. Maybe he is just kind of bumped down for a fresh arm. I think Leahy could probably come up. Maybe you see that Sunday. But there are moves incrementally that I think they could make. And even when it comes to beefing up the 40-man roster, there are some moves that could be made. So if it's a completely quiet deadline for the Cardinals, I should consider that to be a massive disappointment. And I'm curious if the fans feel the same way, because some sense of direction from Mo and co would be nice. Of here's a signal to how we're looking at things. Because I'll say, I hate to use some of the same terminology I used last year when things were going really, really poorly, but I said, look, it doesn't feel good now. The Cardinals insist that it's going to get better. If it doesn't, we're going to know that eventually too. we're going to be able to look back at the end of the year and say, hey, this didn't go ever the way that you said it would. And last year, the true turning point, the white flag came up at the deadline when they traded away Jordan Hicks and they traded away Jordan Montgomery, traded away Jack Flaherty. Last deadline. That was the signal. It was unspoken. It came in the form of transactions. You knew. The actions told the story. I think the actions could tell the story this deadline. And if the action ends up being inaction, they don't do anything, it to me indicates that the front office doesn't believe that what they have right now is enough to supplement to really go for it. Is that the message they're eventually going to send? I don't think it is. I think there will be a trade. I said on the KTGR Big Show Friday afternoon that before the Big Show begins on Monday at 4 p.m., over under 0.5 trades by the Cardinals, I said over. I think they'll make a trade. Now, is trading away Carlson to clear a 40-man spot and Gio to clear a bullpen spot, technically those would be trades. I don't know if those moves will come to fruition, but I do know that those would just be hopefully the precursor to something that would actually improve the team. But I think there are margins of this roster that can be improved upon, and that's due to the construction of the I'm not going to harp the bullpen too much because there have been injuries there, and I think Mo largely did a nice job of filling this org with viable candidates for the bullpen this year as compared to last year where he didn't do that. But the bench construction, I think, is fair to look at and say, outside of Brandon Crawford being able to sling 89 miles per hour, throw more velo than Leno as a pitcher on Saturday night, I don't really know, I like Brandon Crawford. Are the Cardinals going to look at it and say, yeah, we can probably give our manager more utility and have weapons off the bench? Because right now, you know what Crawford's role is. He's going to play some shortstop and an occasional third base just to give the starter a blow. His numbers aren't such that says he's going to provide you a matchup advantage off the bench in almost any other circumstance. A 542 OPS. There's no spite in that. There's no spite in saying, maybe this is something that we kind of look at the deadline. Tommy Edman, unfortunately, is not close enough for it to matter just yet in terms of being able to think about the trade deadline. Like, it'd be nice if you had these guys like O'Brien and Edman on the way back and close enough to where you could bake some of those considerations into where the trade deadline is going to trend and how you want to perform the moves that you're going to make there. But you can't really do it. You almost have to keep them out of sight, out of mind. And that's how Ollie framed it. Steven Matz, same thing. He was playing long toss today on the field. I was told before the game. Didn't see it, but I was told. So those things are happening, right? Like, it's all in the periphery, but you can't get caught up in it as, certainly not as Ollie Marmol, but even as the front office. I think to say, well, we've got Tommy Edman coming back, that's not a reason to not try to upgrade this bench. And if you end up having to later cut somebody and it's uncomfortable, okay, that is the business of baseball. And I do think, while you shouldn't go out of your way to try to do stuff like that, because it eventually you don't want to be known as the ruthless place that just is being reckless with the way you treat people's careers. By the same token, though, you do have to, I think, improve the utility of the last spot or two of that bullpen, and I'm not going to say overhaul the bench, because I don't think Matt Carpenter's going anywhere, and I really don't think Brandon Crawford's going anywhere, but something's going to have to give it at a certain point of, if you can't make the big upgrades, are the little and incremental upgrades worthwhile to the Cardinals as a message of, yeah, we do believe that we need to be trying to gain any edge possible to make the postseason, because that's what we owe to our fan base, because we told them it's what we were gonna make sure we could do. I'm of the opinion that the Cardinals should still add, that they should buy, and that they should do so aggressively. And even if that means a baseball trade, let's see a baseball trade. You trade the Orioles trade Austin Hayes to the Phillies for Sir Anthony Dominguez and Christian Pache. That's a baseball trade. There's big leaguers on both sides of that deal. That's okay. Those trades are allowed too. And whatever kind of discomfort it may give you in the clubhouse, or whatever the case might be, life will go on, and maybe the new mix that you bring into into that room can lead to something special. I think that's the part that John Mozeliak needs to be playing right now. That's his role, in my opinion. Let me know if you agree with it out there in Cardinals land. If you think they shouldn't even bother, that's okay if you feel that way. Let me know why, though. Give me some good some juicy insight as to why you believe that it's just not even worth it to make these moves, if you feel that way. I might even put it out as a poll on Sunday morning if I remember to. Like, do you want to see him buy, or are you just so disillusioned right now that you're worried they'll step on a landmine if they do try to buy, and they'll miss the postseason, and then whoever they trade away, they're going to regret it a couple of years down the road? Let me know what you think about that. I do want to go down to the farm, though, real quickly, because we do have a couple of games from Memphis and Springfield to get into. It's time to go down on the farm. And Down on the Farm is presented by Hastings Layers Premium Eggs. Get your farm fresh eggs from Hastings Layers Premium Eggs out there in beautiful Southwest Indiana. Tommy Edman was back in action tonight for the Springfield Cardinals. DHing, still have not seen him in the field. 0 for 4 tonight. No strikeouts, so putting the ball in play, but did not get on base this evening. But he was not the main storyline that took place in Springfield. Tink Hence returned after about, I think, a month off, because it was sometime in June, as I recall it, that, mid-June when we saw him in Birmingham. I was actually among a couple of reporters that got a chance to chat with him, and that's when I kind of said, hey, Tink, I'm seeing online that Cardinals fans are saying you're kicking their ass on MLB The Show. And he kind of laughed at that, and he said he really does enjoy getting to play with Cardinals fans and interact that way. So he was really cool about it. But at that time, he was not pitching and was dealing with a cramping situation in what he described as his side. And I don't know if that was obliquey, if that was what exactly we were talking with. He didn't want to give a ton of info, and understandably so. You don't want to try to make more of something than what it is when it's just you were describing it as a cramping issue. But he had pitched June 5th and then was out with that issue. Shortly after Birmingham, did come back and pitch on June 23rd, but was out of the game after just an inning, dealing with the issue again. Over a month later, he returns tonight against that same team that he faced a month ago, Corpus Christi, and pitched an inning and 2/3 and looked sharp, man. And don't worry about the inning and 2/3. I saw people going, hug watch, is he getting traded? No. He was out for a month and was going to be on a pretty low pitch count just to get back into the swing of things. Inning and 2/3, 4 strikeouts, 1 hit allowed, no walks. That's sharpness. The pitches look good from the little clips I saw there on social media. And then Max Radjic was good in quote-unquote relief. He would have been probably on turn as the starter and threw bulk. 6 1/3 innings, 7 strikeouts, 1 walk, 3 hits, no runs allowed by Max Radjic, who, again, is a former minor league pitcher of the year in the Cardinals organization. I think he won the award last year, if I'm not mistaken, as I think he was down there with Palm Beach and then Peoria. He's here with Springfield now. Not a great season for him, 4.79 ERA, but he improves to 8-8. Does get the win tonight. He's only 22 years old. He's a good kid. I would love to see Max Radjic get on a little bit of a roll here and be able to force the issue for a promotion before the end of the season, which is also going to be dependent upon kind of what the Memphis rotation is looking like. But they've had so many injuries in that Memphis rotation. And look, some of those guys, Zach Thompson just got back to health. Does he end up on the block for a team like the White Sox where you could consider they could plug him into the rotation and just see? Because right now with the Cardinals, it just doesn't seem like he's under much consideration. Like, it wouldn't shock me if Mozeliak is working the phones on those types of moves and it's not sexy, but to clear some 40-man spots, to clear some spots in that Memphis rotation, because you've got a few dudes in that AA rotation that by next year could all be ascending to AAA. Tink Hence, hopefully Radjic could apply to him. Quinn Matthews certainly is somebody else that we're looking at as a quick riser. Cooper Jerpy. So those moves would count towards something organizationally. I just don't think they're going to move the needle toward this season. But if you do it by trading a Zach Thompson for a reliever that you think you could use, that he may be a rental, but the team getting Zach Thompson thinks he's a long-term starter for them under team control, like, you could see both sides maybe getting something out of that. That's something I would keep a little bit of an eye on. There's no intel as to believing something like that's imminent, but just something to think about as far as strategy of it goes. And in Memphis, Victor Scott hit a home run tonight. How about that? His 4th of the season. He had a great game leading off tonight. His numbers have not been great in Memphis. I think he's been working through some swing stuff. Would love to see Victor Scott get it going. I really like Victor Scott. Wanted it to work out for him when they elevated him at the beginning of the season. But tonight, good things to see from him as he hit that home run, scored a couple of runs while he reached base 3 times via walk. I would not walk Victor Scott 3 times in the same game. Just me personally. Kind of surprised to see that he didn't steal a bunch of bases with all those walks. But I just looking at the box score, I don't know the circumstances of who was on base or when some of those came to pass. Jordan Walker, 1 for 4, also reached base via walk. He's got the OPS at 677 with AAA. By the way, Victor's is 588, but he's still been their leadoff man. He's going to get there. I think Victor Scott's going to figure it out. Not to be a world beater at the big league level offensively, but I think he can find his way back to the big league level at a minimum. Sajasi goes 3 for 5. That's good to see from him as well. Had a double in this game. So a little bit of intrigue there from some of the guys down in Memphis. Zach Thompson, I did just mention him. He started the game for Memphis. Only an inning and 2/3. I'm not 100% sure why that is. If he's just coming back from injury, so maybe the same thing. Somewhat of a pitch count, 49 pitches. Didn't pitch well. 3 walks, 3 runs allowed. Like if you told me right now, Zach Thompson for John Brebbia, I would say sure. Zach Thompson for a middle reliever that could have utility and you could put him into the Gio role almost. I don't think that's the worst thing in the world necessarily, but we'll see. We'll see. I wish to see Zach Thompson put it together, but man, it's just been one roadblock after another, and he has not been able to figure it out. And I still think it is bizarre. I'm just going to say it. I think it is bizarre that the word from him in the offseason, and what, not from the offseason, but we found out later after the Cardinals had sent him down earlier this season, was that he had lost weight in the offseason, and that was affecting his mechanics and affecting his velo and his oomph behind his pitches. But like the weight loss was intentional, designed to improve his game. It just doesn't make any sense to me. And I'll just leave it there because I don't want to say anything out of turn because maybe there was a good reason for it. And I understand that I don't know everything. I'm always willing to be wrong, right? So if I'm wrong, tell me in the comments. But that's one that I just have not really totally understood. Why did that happen in the first place? And I think Gio was kind of in that spot too. He came to spring looking real trim, which is, that's great. Good for him. But also it coincides with we didn't see him pitch very well this year. So I kind of wonder what to do about that. But anyway, that's all I got for you guys tonight. Appreciate you guys for listening as always. What do you think the Cardinals should do? Let me know in the comments below. We're going to only be able to ask that question a couple more days, and then we're going to know the answers because the deadline is 5 p.m. Tuesday. So appreciate you guys as always for listening. We'll talk to you next time on B-Schaeff Daily. Peace.